Josh Swanson, Vogel Law Firm.
Thank you very much for joining the program here today. And I love checking in with Josh Swanson from Vogel Law because, Law and Order, big show on television. CSI, law shows are always number one on television and streaming. So they got to be huge on the radio and podcasting. Ain't that right, Josh Swanson?
Absolutely. There's no coincidence there. Law and Order, one of the longest running TV shows in history. I think it was up to 400 plus episodes, and the true crime podcasts and crime stuff leading off the news. So people love the Law and Order, Jason, and that's what I'm here to provide, a little bit of Law and Order.
So now that we've made this interview bigger than 10 Super Bowls, we should probably get right into it here. So let's start off with an update on the famous Lake Sakakawea Wilkinson case out in western North Dakota. Start off by, just a quick elevator pitch style summary of the case and then where we're at today.
The state of North Dakota continues to claim that it owns all the minerals under the lake by virtue of the United States acquiring that property for Garrison Dam and the Lake Sakakawea Reservoir. As you and your listeners know, the legislature passed Senate Bill 2134 a couple sessions ago, which created a new set of statutes in our Century Code, which lets the Industrial Commission issuing an order saying that the state's interests are limited to the historic river as it existed prior to the dam, which is what everybody agrees with as far as mineral owners and operators. But for whatever reason, the state here, in its case, between the State Engineer and Land Board, will not release its claim to the Wilkinson's minerals, despite the fact that Wilkinson's minerals are indisputably above the ordinary high water mark as determined by the Industrial Commission. So the final set of briefs, we just filed our brief with the North Dakota Supreme Court responding to the state's appeal. As you know, visiting last fall, the district court granted summary judgment in the mineral owners, my client's favor. The state appealed that. We're before the Supreme Court now. We filed our response brief to the state's appeal last week, and the Supreme Court has set the case for an argument in April. We're just waiting on a specific date for argument, but it will be argued in the April term.
Argued in the April term, okay. And you've won the last couple, haven't you? This is like an appeal?
This is an appeal, and we've won. The frustrating thing, and the North Dakota Petroleum Council filed an amicus brief in our case, by and large taking our position in the case and agreeing with us, and we certainly appreciate them doing that. You have a case where mineral owners and operators are on the same page and united against the state's Keystone Cops approach and attempt to claim minerals they have no interest in. And it's a case where we won the last appeal a couple of years ago. We've won every decision since then at the district court. The legislature has passed the statute. The governor signed it. So you've had in the last 3-4 years here, everybody and their mother-in-law coming out telling the State Engineer and Land Board they don't have a claim. But for whatever reason, they persist in saying that they own these minerals. So now the silver lining, I suppose, is we're at the light at the end of the tunnel back in front of the Supreme Court for a second time, and we're hopeful and optimistic that the Supreme Court will side with our position and finally and definitively say that the state has no interest in these private minerals.
With the oil prices the way they are, do you foresee this being an issue? What I mean by that is, listen, Josh, 55% of the state's budget is tied to the oil extraction and production tax in North Dakota. So you know as well as I do, they're going to be looking for ways to find money. And this might be one of those ways. Is that out of line for me to say at this juncture?
The interesting thing about that, the state itself, what effectively the state wants to do, the land board wants to sue the Industrial Commission on this, so we'd have a lawsuit captioned state versus state. So you have the left hand of state government not doing what the right hand's doing, and there are some folks, and that's how I think, Jason, this whole thing started back in 2010. someone with the land board or in the Attorney General's office got this bright idea that they could just take private property and make a bunch of money off it, and that's what all these memos from the land board back from the fall and summer of 2010 indicate. So I think, that old saying, follow the money, I think there's certainly a motivating factor with some individuals that think this is a revenue source for the state. The other end of it, though, as the Petroleum Council has noted in its brief, and mineral owners are paying attention to it, operating and developing these minerals has a significant cost. And there's, when you throw in uncertainty and actions that the state is doing, all of a sudden that's a complicating factor with regards to developing these minerals if operators are not knowing who to pay, and the operators themselves, as far as the Petroleum Council, siding with the private mineral owners here. I mean, they're my take on it is they're agreeing with our position, but at the same time, they're being put into a corner a little bit because they don't want to go pay private mineral owners like my clients and have the state clawing back at them trying to get money. And with any sort of business, when you have that uncertainty, when you're looking at down economic times, everything between the coronavirus and what the oil markets are doing, it's not exactly a ripe environment to be investing a lot of money in developing these wells. And when you have government getting in the way, that doesn't help things at all. And that's one of the more frustrating parts about this, is that it's a tough time for a lot of folks in the oil and gas industry and mineral owners. The one thing that mineral owners and operators can agree on, they want that price to be good, and they want that oil to be developed. And when the state gets in the way of that, it isn't good for anybody.
Has the Petroleum Council taken a side in this?
Yeah, and that goes back to the brief they actually filed in the case supporting our position. So the Petroleum Council did. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's a point that needs to be emphasized. Is that they have filed a brief in support of the Wilkinson's position. There's a little bit of divergence there as far as the timeline for paying it, but the ultimate issue, the key issue, number one, top of the fold, leading off top of the hour news story, the big issue is ownership of the minerals, and the Petroleum Council agrees the state doesn't have any claim to these minerals.
How about the governor and the attorney general? And the reason I basically point at those two is because they sit on the land board and they sit on the industrial commission, so they have overlapping board meetings. And have they come out on this at all on either side?
No, they really haven't. There's been radio silence, and that's one of the frustrating things on behalf of mineral owners. And as we note in our brief to the Supreme Court, the governor and attorney general both sit on the industrial commission that issued an order approving the study which determined that all these minerals were above the ordinary high water mark, and the state, by virtue of that, had no claim to them. But now you have the land board, on which the governor and attorney general also sit, suing contesting that claim in court. The lawsuit that my clients are in, the land board is saying they have a claim to these minerals. So the issue where it's so very frustrating for a private citizen and a mineral owner like my clients, you have two state boards, the Industrial Commission and the Land Board, and two of the big players, if not the biggest players on both of those entities, the governor and the attorney general, they're taking opposite positions on this issue. And it's further, the whole, I hate to call it a Shakespearean tragedy or be, too melodramatic about it, but the Sorum versus State case, where you have Representative Nelson and Paul Sorum, an architect out of Fargo, suing the state, challenging the constitutionality of the statute we've been talking about. That was just argued a few weeks ago to the Supreme Court. And in that case, the state agrees with our position. So you've got the state, and that's one of the things we'll raise at the Supreme Court, and we've argued in our briefing, is the state is taking diametrically opposed positions, one position in our case, and the exact opposite position in this Sorum litigation. So that this whole saga, the fact it's gone on for going on a decade now, and the state can't figure out what the hell it wants to argue on it, and is taking conflicting positions. We're looking forward to getting in front of the Supreme Court and hoping to get some clarity. I think that's really one thing between, whether it's the Petroleum Council, operators, or mineral owners. We need that voice from the Supreme Court that's loud and clear and tells the state to knock this stuff off.
Okay, two things here. Number one is I'm just writing my notes down from my former political days when I was doing a lot more of the political news back at my old stomping grounds, and I'm missing that, man, because what you just said, I think I wrote about 6 months worth of talk radio down just off of the Attorney General and Governor, and that's the second part I want to get into here, which is the Keystone Copper word you used earlier. I think is probably a pretty good description, because this is if I was a pundit, okay, if I was a political pundit, I would be all over this, Josh, because you have the governor and you have the attorney general who sit on the land board and they sit on the industrial commission, and they might end up suing each other. Is that what you were telling me? Is that what? I'm sorry, but I just had to make sure. Am I following my notes correctly here?
Yeah, that's it. It sounds absurd to say, but that is the reality of the situation. That the land board is arguing to the Supreme Court that they should be able to challenge the order issued under statute by the Industrial Commission, which means that the land board would have to sue the Industrial Commission, on which the governor and attorney general both sit. And if it sounds bonkers and bad blank crazy, it's because it absolutely is. And I would love for somebody to step up. The legislature tried to get it right, but it's the executive branch of government that has screwed the pooch on this and letting this get so sideways where they're either one of two things. They're blissfully ignorant and they just don't care, and they have their heads so far buried in the sand, or they've committed to a course of action and they're showing poor leadership by taking this thing to a conclusion where the ultimate outcome is inescapable. This state does not and cannot, as a matter of law, own these minerals, but they continue to put private mineral owners and operators through this. So at one point, you would think there would be someone in an office in the Capitol somewhere saying, enough is enough. How did it ever get to this point? But they've doubled down and they've tripled down and they've quadrupled down, and we're to the point where we're going back to the Supreme Court for a second time on this, when the Supreme Court was clear in its first decision as to the takings issue, I think, in the application of the statute. So we'll see how it plays out. And if it sounds like there's a lot of frustration in my voice, there is. I have clients that have lived with this for a decade. I've had clients who have died without being able to enjoy the minerals and the proceeds from the minerals that are rightfully theirs. And as much as I love making money and being a lawyer, I've got clients that are paying me to argue a same position where I know we're right. I know that the law says the state cannot take their minerals, but here we are, going on a decade where the state of North Dakota refuses to drop their claim to the minerals. So, we're looking forward to arguing this to the North Dakota Supreme Court. We're looking forward to a decision from the Supreme Court, and we're really looking forward to some finality on it, because at the end of the day, enough is enough, where the outcome and the destination we've arrived at is the land board threatening or saying that they might sue the Industrial Commission to challenge this is absolutely ludicrous.
That is so amazing to me. Like I said, folks, you want to have some good radio, good podcast, you bring on an attorney, because what we're just listening to right here is before the Garrison. When was the Garrison diversion? The 60s? Was that when it was built? Was the 1960s or 50? When was that Garrison diversion built?
The dam itself was built in the 50s.
50s, okay, 50s.
And President Eisenhower, one of my favorite presidents, was out there in Garrison or Riverdale when they did the initial dirt work back, and I want to say it was 53 or 54. Ike was out there for that, and they had a big party.
Well, and where I'm going with this is that so back in those days it was farmland, and then they were going to build this diversion, this dam, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in and cited that land, correct?
They absolutely did.
And then they at that time, The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had the minerals to your current clients, correct?
My clients and thousands of other private mineral owners in a very comprehensive and in-depth process where what you're getting at here, the listener who's listening to this right now is going to say, that really can't be the case, is it? What is the state doing? That's exactly what they're doing, and this matter had been settled for half a century, and the state was involved in that process where the Corps of Engineers came in and acquired all the surface and determined where the boundary of the historic river was and determined the takings line for the property they would need to take. And in fact, to add another layer of absurdity to this cake of, the half-baked cake the state's trying to take out of the oven, back in 2016 when the state tried to redraw these lines through those Bartlett and West studies and claim all these minerals, the Department of Interior and Bureau of Land Management issued a decision telling the state, in short, they were out of their minds in acting in an illegal manner trying to redraw these lines, and the state still persisted even in the face of that.
Well, where I was going with this is what it really seems to me is like what happens when an oil boom, an oil bust happens, because, we had 20 years without any real oil activity out there. And during that time, a new wave of politicians came in, a new wave of elected officials, a new wave of appointed leaders of boards. Keep in mind, a lot of decisions get made by appointed people, not by elected people, by appointed people. And I think what happened here was they saw a way to make more money. They saw a way to direct more money to their projects that they wanted to do, and they didn't realize what had happened. And because of the power they have, and like you said, your clients are paying you, and a lot of them haven't even paid on these mineral rights. But these government elected officials that are taking these citizens to court, they get their checks. They get paid. They get their mortgages paid, no problem. That's where I think the real problem is that it's almost like they're bleeding the citizens and they're hemorrhaging them from what has already been proven and awarded to by the Supreme Court. That's where it really bothers me, is that they know they're in the wrong, but it's like they're digging their heels in because they can. Am I out of line for saying that, Josh?
No, I don't think so. And I think there's when you talk about government and private industry, and I don't want to be the guy bashing government because we've got hundreds of really good public servants in our state and in our communities. But in this situation, there's been such a failure of leadership and a lacking of accountability where, had this been a private business like my law firm or any other sort of organization, someone's ass would have been fired for screwing up like this. You hold people accountable. They can't get away with this stuff. But at state government, you're spot on that there's people appointed to these positions, and they don't have that same sort of accountability, or they haven't been held accountable. And I want to read you a quick excerpt here, and this is from a March 23rd, 2016 decision by the U.S. Department of Interior telling the state that what they were trying to claim was out of line, and I'm quoting, "The core segment maps are firmly grounded in guidance, methodology, and contemporaneous field investigation of the land prior to the effects of flooding. These segment maps are the most comprehensive evidence of the ordinary high water mark prior to the artificial rising to create Lake Sakakawea. The segment maps were the basis for millions of dollars of appropriated funds being spent to acquire displaced uplands and were generated with determinations from in-the-field investigations by the BLM, involvement from the BLM and the state of North Dakota Land Board, and have gone uncontested for over 60 years. And the state still persists in light of that." So I think when you say, I think it's completely fair to say that there's appointed folks, and whether it's advisors, and even to a certain extent, it's like that old Harry Truman sign on the Roosevelt desk in the Oval Office, "The buck stops here." At a certain point, whether it's the Attorney General or Governor, you've got to walk into an office or go up to the people that work for you and say, what the hell is going on? We need to fix this. And when I say there's been such a failure of leadership here on all levels, that's exactly what's happened. It should have never, ever gone to this point yet. Here we are getting ready to go back to the Supreme Court for a second time after private, and it's not just my clients that haven't been paid in about a decade. It's thousands of other people I talk to every week whose proceeds from their minerals are being held in suspense because of the state's ludicrous claim to them.
So, correct me if I'm wrong here, that this is actually, okay, this is going to have a ripple throughout these other people as well, but so let's say that, you guys, the Supreme Court sides with you again after this appeal, so then you've won once again, and then the land department does sue the Industrial Commission. Well, then what? I mean, I don't understand how that could even happen. And then now I don't understand what that would accomplish, because let's say the land board sues the Industrial Commission that both the Attorney General and the governor both sit on. And Helms, is Helms on the land board too? I don't think so. Is he?
No, he's not.
Because I was going to say the Industrial Commission's only 3 people, right? No.
Yep, correct. The governor, the AG, and then the Ag Commissioner.
The Ag Commissioner, that's it. The Ag Commissioner. Then, so that's right. The governor's not even on there. My fault on that.
No, the governor's on the Industrial Commission. It'd be the Governor Burgum, Attorney General Stenjum, and then Commissioner Goring are the 3 on the Industrial.
Oh, that's right. Helms isn't even on that. Yep. That's right. He's not even on that.
He's the executive. Yeah, he's the executive director of the oil and gas division.
He's the guy that has to do the stuff that they say. That's right. Okay, he's the regulator.
He's got a big voice for sure. Yeah,
okay.
He certainly plays a role.
Do you see how confusing this can get? And so, but either way, my point is that the Attorney General and the governor sit on the same board here. And if they sue each other, well, what's that going to accomplish? I mean, besides spending a bunch of tax money, because at the end of the day, the whole idea is they want those minerals that the citizens have had their whole life. So if the land board sues the Industrial Commission, I guess I don't even know what that would solve.
And here's the kicker to it. That's what they're arguing to the Supreme Court, that the land board should be able to sue and challenge the Industrial Commission. The land board's not going to do that. We all know that. Can you imagine the land board filing a lawsuit against the Industrial Commission? I don't think that's going to happen, but that's what... Now, there's 2 different things. There's the land board saying they should be able to do that and saying they have that right. But at the end of the day, is the land board really going to sue the Industrial Commission? I don't think so, but that's what the land board is arguing they should be able to do. So they're arguing that this thing should be held up for something that, in all likelihood, will never happen, because it's tough to fathom or envision that the land board is actually going to sue the Industrial Commission when you have 2 of its big-ticket members overlapping and sitting on both boards and suing themselves.
Well, that's why it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but at the same time, just the fact that the conversation has been had, or the idea.
That's what they're arguing. That's what the land board is arguing. They're arguing they should be able to do that.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Just the fact that any energy is being expelled towards that is absolutely asinine, in my opinion, in this reporter's opinion. And it's making me want to get back in the political game once again, because this is a political year, and boy, that's like shooting fish in a barrel there. I mean, that's unbelievable to me. I thought it was absolutely hilarious when the Western Area Water Supply, WAS, which is kind of a political subdivision, and there's other ones like that as well. That's just the first one off the top of my head. They have a lobbyist. So it's unbelievable when you have government departments that actually have lobbyists to go lobby for more government money. I thought that was bizarre. But now, when you have inner departments talking about suing each other, when more than 50% of the committee is made up by the same people, I don't even know what to call that.
Well, here's the interesting thing there is that the Attorney General's office is the legal counsel for both of those entities.
I know.
So there's overlap with the attorneys there. So at what point does the Attorney General tell his attorneys to knock it off or take charge of this thing? So that's it's just layer upon layer of absurdity here, where you get down into a legal universe where it's tough. If someone would have told me, 6-7 years ago when I got involved in this case, this is where we would be, I would say, hey, there's no possible way under the law or facts you can ever end up there, and the state would never argue that. But yet, sometimes life is stranger than fiction, and here we are.
This has got all the twists and turns and drama of Law and Order with the comedy of The Office.
Yeah, it's a really bad John. I'm a big John Grisham fan. I read all of his books. It's a really kind of really goofy Grisham plot where you got different folks and the same folks playing different sides of the same angle, and it just gets all convoluted, and you have these plot twists. And if this were a Grisham book, I probably would have thrown it away after 20 pages saying this is absolutely
much kinder than me. I'm thinking of a bunch of Steve Carell's from The Office trying to run meetings.
Yeah.
Trying to just look the part and just trying to say the right thing, just coming out with a bunch of cliche sayings to move things along and not even understanding what happened in the meeting. And actually, I think there's more evidence for what I just said than what the actual reality is. I mean, I just don't get it. But all right, so let's transition gears here a little bit. Obviously, you've seen the news when it comes to the stock market, the oil prices, the coronavirus, all the different things that are happening that is creating some problems with the economy. And, it's not a good time for that. But one of the things that does open up is, some people need some contract help. They need some help collecting bills. They need some help, from that sort of thing. Do you guys, Josh, do you do that? I know you do minerals and that sort of thing, and you guys do have a pretty big law firm, so I'm sure you can refer it out if you don't do it. But are you guys getting any calls on that? I'm sure you are when it comes to people that are needing help deciphering how to get some bills paid and what does this contract mean that was signed,
Yeah, and I think that's, we saw it happen a couple of years ago, and Vogel does offer those services, the contract business disputes, collection issues, breach of contract. We're a full service firm with over 50 attorneys, so we've got that covered, and I'm involved in that stuff, and that's one of the realities when there's a downturn in the market. Cash ends up folks having concerns about whether or not bills are going to get paid before people fold or take off and hightail it out of here. So when times are good and everyone's sitting in a pretty good cash position, if you've got 200 or 300K in accounts you need to collect from someone who did some work for you or whatever, it might slide for a while. But then when the price of oil starts to drop and there's the dark clouds looming on the horizon for the economy, then folks tend to need representation on that. So that's something we're familiar with, something we work in, and if there's listeners out there that are needing representation, they're welcome to give us a call on that. But that's one of the realities with any sort of, not just oil, but any sort of market where you have a more boom bust commodity where it's up and down and there's fluctuations. There's different work on the front end of it. There's different work during, peak development or the last, probably 18 to 24 months where things were pretty stable. And then when you get to a trough in the market where things bottom out a little bit, there's a different kind of work that needs to be done from a business perspective on that.
Well, and I talked to a guy earlier in the finance world because, he does some non-traditional independent type loans because the banks are tightening up right now. They're actually making energy companies go back and get a new certification. And at a time when slow pay is a real problem and when stocks are down, there's a need for some alternative financing. Just like, what we said about you with some of the contract disputes, the breach of contracts, that's a real thing. And that's one of the things that happens during the ebbs and flows of the market. I remember talking to Kevin Pfeiffer at Pfeiffer Auction when the first downturn came in the Bakken. And he felt bad because a lot of companies that he sold property to 5 years later, he was selling it away from him because, they lost it or they needed to sell it, and so he was making money during the good times and the bad times. And it dawned on him, that even during the bad times when he was making money, he still felt bad about it, but it's still there. And
no one certainly wants to. All of us, whether it's you, me, anyone in the game, we'd much rather see the markets on the other side of it and things going well, because that's better for the economy writ large. Folks are spending money, they're hiring, there's job creation, and folks aren't getting laid off or fired. And we saw, the downside of it a few years ago when things bottomed out, all the job loss, and that's something that nobody wants. But that's a reality where when you talk about the alternative financing and banks tightening up, and that's it's one of those things about the economy. We saw it with the markets earlier this week. Panic is the worst thing that could happen. Then you have a sell-off and folks start getting anxious, and then that lack of confidence can have such a disastrous effect on the market. And I don't need to tell you that, but I think the concern here, and I've heard folks, we mentioned Lynn Helms earlier. I've seen him out there talking about it, and I've seen other individuals in the industry out there. People are paying attention, and everyone's hoping for the best, but there's an element of you have to prepare for every contingencies, and hopefully the Saudis and the Russians will get things figured out. But I would say where we're sitting right now, it has an impact on our business because it impacts our clients, and we care about our clients, and we'd rather see the market doing a lot better than it is, because it certainly has an impact on communities from Williston to Dickinson to Crosby, Watford City, Bismarck, and all the way to Fargo, where I'm talking to you from my outlaw office, and it impacts what I'm doing.
Now, you're stationed in North Dakota, so you do a lot of work primarily with the Bakken and mineral owners and oil and gas companies with the Bakken, but you've got clients all over the country, don't you?
Oh, yeah. I'm, in fact, the majority of clients that I have, there's a lot of them that I don't meet face-to-face or person-to-person. It's all over the phone, and they're located not just all over the country, but all over the world. And of course, I've got clients, a lot of farmers and ranchers, and even energy companies and service providers in North Dakota. But that's one of the things with this commodity, the oil and gas industry. There's folks from all over that have an interest in it, and they're amongst my clients. I'm glad to represent them. I'm looking at one of my office shelves, and I get Christmas cards and graduation cards and thank you cards, and I just kind of stack them up on my shelves, and they're from all corners of the country.
All right, just before we let you go, I need to find out what's going on in the world of podcasting, because folks, not only is he an attorney, but he's also a podcaster. He does the North Dakota State podcast, the NDSU Bison podcast, if you will. Primarily football, but I know that you also get into the basketball world, and I think the Bison are in the finals for the Summit League Championship as we're speaking right now. At least I saw they won the other night in Sioux Falls. And are you still doing the podcast?
Yeah, we're still doing it. And in fact, the Bison beat the University of North Dakota 89-53, laid a 36-point beatdown on UND to win the Summit League Championship, to punch their ticket to March Madness. So Dave Richmond and the boys will be back playing in the NCAA tournament. They'll find out here on Selection Sunday coming up in a few days who they'll play. But yeah, the Bison are back in the NCAA tournament, and I still got, you talk about podcasting, I'm still doing the weekly radio show, the Heard It Here with Swanee on KFGO's sister station, 740 AM, The Fan, and we're tentatively, I just talked to one of the guys from the station this morning. We're planning potential road trips, coverage options to follow the Bison and broadcast from wherever they're playing from. But the coronavirus issue and the NCAA, how they're going to handle that at different locations, will play a role. But yeah, we're still doing that, and we're still having a really good time covering the Bison. And what can you say about Dave Richmond's squad? They 25-8 in the regular season, going back to the NCAA tournament. Just such a remarkable job by him.
I didn't even realize the University of North Dakota was in the Summit League for basketball. I didn't even know that. I knew they were in.
Yeah, they just jumped from the Big Sky a couple of years ago. I think it was their second full year here in the Summit. Yeah.
So look at that, my alma mater, NDSU. They're going to be playing in the March Madness tournament, and are they expected to get a 12 seed or a 15 seed, or are they looking at maybe as much as a 10? I don't know. I mean, my guess is they'd probably be a 14 or 15.
Yeah, if I had to put money on it, I'd say they'd probably end up on that 14 line, especially with how they ended the regular season. They're something like 12-1 in their last 13 games going back to January. Yeah, they've had a really good stretch. They beat East Tennessee State, who is one of the better teams in mid-major basketball. East Tennessee beat LSU earlier this year. The Bison beat East Tennessee. So with a 36-point win in a conference championship game, the fact that was nationally broadcast, and you've got guys, anytime you can put up 89 points and have guys, it's not just one guy carrying the load for NDSU. I think that's what makes them so dangerous. You got Vinny Shahid and Tyson Ward that could play at most Power 5 schools. But then you've got guys like a Jared Samuelson and a Rocky Cruiser and Cam Hunter and Sam Cariso, who can come off and knock down big shots from you and score when your main guys aren't scoring, and you need that to put up 89 points like the Bison did. But what makes them really dangerous, Jason, is they can play lockdown defense. That's the bread and butter of a Dave Richmond team. They are so fundamentally sound on the defensive end that if they can avoid that 15 line, if they can get up to the 14 line or even the 13 line, they got a chance to win some games in March Madness. And folks might call me crazy. They've got the potential, the way they can shoot the ball from the perimeter, the way Tyson Ward and Vinny Shahid can get to the rim and get to the free throw line, the way they convert on those free throws, and the way they play defense. This team, if they knock down shots, they can hang with anybody. And we've seen it in March. We've seen 10 seeds and 11 seeds make it to the Sweet 16 and even the Elite 8. So stay tuned, because the Bison, this team's got the parts where they could put together a run here in the next few weeks.
I'm going to predict a 13 seed for them based on just what you mentioned, their streak they're on. I think the tournament is the selection committee is going to take that into consideration, because they love the upsets. They love the 10 to 13 upsets. Those ones are great, because they'll make it to the Sweet 16. And you know as well as I do, at the end of the day, it's two of the number ones in the Final Four, and usually a 3 and a 2. Every now and then a 4 or a 5 gets in there, but generally it's the top 3 ranked, teams in each division. One of them get in there, and but it's fun. I mean, every team's got a shot. I mean, Valparaiso, man, Homer Drew, back when I was a kid, that's what I remember, making shots, making it to the Sweet 16, and Jim Valvano with North Carolina State looking for someone to hug, and look at who can I hug, and no one will hug me. He's just looking for someone. This is great, but all right, man, we better
Yama in Houston.
We better let people know how they can get in touch with you if they want some legal help on the mineral side, or the debt servicing and the contract disputes, if you will, and then we'll talk about where they can get your podcast too. So on the legal side, where can they find you?
They can find us at vogellaw.com. That's VOGEL, law, LAW.com. They can also give us a call at 701-237-6983. That's 701-237-6983, and we'll get them, whatever their need is, we'll get them to the right person. And
the podcast is available how? It's on the radio and online, is that correct?
Yeah, radio and online on Apple iTunes. Search Bison Illustrated Podcast. You can also find us on Google Play and SoundCloud, or check out BisonIllustrated.com. And for the radio show on the terrestrial radio, heard it here with Swanee every Saturday morning from 8 to 9 a.m. on 740 a.m. The Fan, 107.3 FM, and they can listen online at 740thefan.com.